have gathered to hear your word. Your spirit surrounds us. Let our voices be heard. There is none like you. No deed can compare. In every generation, we have offered our prayer. We sing of your praises in heaven, on earth. We celebrate creation to the life that you gave birth. You are mighty as the river, so sweet is your love. You are strong as the tide, gentle as the dove. Ein kamocha ba'Elohim Adonai, ve'ein kema'asecha. Malchutecha, malchut kol olamim, umemshaltecha bechol dor vador. Ein kamocha ba'Elohim Adonai, ve'ein kema'asecha. Malchutecha, malchut kol amim, umemshaltecha bechol dor vador.
Leshana tova tikatevu, Leshana tova tikatevu. Ma'oz tzur Yeshuati, Lechana eleshabeach. Daidayenu, 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 dayenu, dayenu. When we hear these melodies, we are immediately transported. Leshana Tova fills this very room with family and friends celebrating the Jewish New Year. Ma'oz Tzur reminds us of the smell of latkes and the beauty of the Chanukiah. Dayenu evokes the presence of families singing around the Seder tables. What about Shavuot? We are here celebrating the revelation of the Torah. Yet, is there a melody that can remind us of this sacred occasion? And, of course, of the cheesecake? Akdamut milin v'sharayut shuta avla shakerna harman ureshuta. Written by a cantor 1,000 years ago, Rabbi Meir Bar Yitzchak of Orleans wrote this 90-verse poem filled with praise of God, His Torah, and of His people Israel, as an akdamut milin, an introduction to the words of the 10 Commandments that we are about to hear chanted. This prayer akdamut, with its unique melody, is recited only once every year, tomorrow morning, right before the recitation of the 10 Commandments. The festive motif is also used during our festival Kiddush and during the Hallel service to remind us of this special piyut. On this Shavuot, I pray that the melody of akdamut can remind us of this special holiday, filling our souls with celebration of receiving Torah, spending quality time with friends and family, and, of course, eating cheesecake. Chag Sameach.
During this pandemic, Rabbi Guzik and I decided to plant 2 lemon trees in our backyard. It's something that we've never done before, so each morning we would go outside and look to try and find the first fruits on those trees. And if you've ever tried that, it's basically impossible. The first fruit looks like the last fruit. And this exercise reminded me of a lesser-known mitzvah that is associated with this holiday of Shavuot. It's called Bikurim, which is the first fruits that were to be brought to the temple in Jerusalem on this holiday. What would happen? The farmer would go mark the first fruit on the trees. And when the farmer would do this, the fruits were now known as kadosh. They were holy and sanctified. But the fruits didn't just stay on those trees. Rather, the farmer would make a pilgrimage to Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem, and put the fruits in a basket. But there were steps to get there. The first thing that they would do, the Mishnah tells us, is that they would quarantine. They would go into their home for several days before they made that pilgrimage to make sure that they were tahor, that they were pure and ready to go. And when they finally got there, they had one more thing to do. They had to make a verbal declaration to say, these are the first fruits to you, God. And they would say these 2 words, Aromimcha Adonai. God, we praise you. When I was thinking about this mitzvah, I was thinking about these last several weeks as we opened our sanctuary for the very first time in over a year to pray together. Aromimcha Adonai. These empty walls were waiting for us to say those words, praise you, God. When we entered that sanctuary just a couple of weeks ago, it was as if we were doing this for the first time again. We all know the very well-known bracha, blessing of Shehechianu, which is said when we do something for the first time. I've said this many times over these past couple of weeks, but behind me sit the Torahs. And as much as we have missed those scrolls, I believe that the scrolls have missed us as well. And so on this holiday of Shavuot, Chag HaBikurim, the festival of the first fruits, let us embrace the Torah as we are experiencing it for the first time again. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach, everyone. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, was known for his style of praying. All around the world, people knew the Baal Shem Tov as someone who would pray for hours upon hours on end with such kavanah, with such intention. And his students and disciples would follow him and pray in the same manner. And although this was fully accepted, there was one Shabbat in which it seemed like the Baal Shem Tov wouldn't stop. You see, on one side of the sanctuary, if you will, were the students and disciples praying. And on the other side were tables of cookies and schnapps. And so as the day continued and as the hours continued, and it looked like the Baal Shem Tov wasn't making any kind of motion to cease his prayer, the students' stomachs began to grumble. And they started to whisper to each other, when do you think he's going to stop? Do you think he's almost done? I wonder, maybe would he notice if we walked over and just grabbed one little cookie? We won't interrupt his prayer at all. And finally, the students just couldn't take it. So the leader of the students, without saying a word, even without whispering anything, motioned to the students with his hands, just like this. And so with that motion, from sitting to standing, they all stood up. And at the moment of standing up, the Baal Shem Tov stopped his prayer, turned to his students, and said, "What are you doing?" The leader of the students couldn't believe it. But Rabbi, we didn't say anything. We didn't do anything. We just stood up. And the Baal Shem Tov looked at his students and said, you have to know that when I'm praying, the purpose of my prayer is that I am ascending on a ladder from earth to the heavens. And although I'm the one who's climbing the ladder, it's all of you that holds the ladder still. And so when you got up, I fell down. I share that story tonight because I'm reminded on Shavuot that we receive the Torah anew. We receive the Torah on Mount Sinai and remind ourselves of the message that's ingrained in our tradition and our faith, that we are connected to each other and connected to God, and we hold each other up. And when we forget that message, that's when we fall. And so I pray tonight that as we receive the Torah, we are reminded of our responsibility and obligation to hold that ladder still so that someone else can ascend to holiness. And I pray as well that someone else is listening to this message and understands their responsibility and their obligation to hold that ladder still so that you can continue to climb higher and higher and higher. Chag Sameach.
On this holiday of Shavuot, I come to talk to you about not talking. Because according to the rabbis, when the Torah was given to Israel at Sinai, there was complete silence in the world. Not a bird sang, not a beast made a sound. Total silence. And then God's voice. And so, say the rabbis, if the world were silent for only a minute, we would hear the echoes of that voice on Sinai. Like every rabbinic story, this has an obvious meaning and a symbolic meaning. It means that when we speak, when our heads are filled with noise, the noise of the world, the noise of each other, there are things we do not hear. There are things we miss because we are so preoccupied with the things that we do pay attention to. Part of the lesson of revelation is, paradoxically, the lesson of silence. And part of listening is hearing beyond the things that are making noise. Just imagine that moment where all of Israel stood around the mountain and there was silence. There was nothing. There was only the filling of that moment with their expectations and their hopes and their dreams, and then the voice of God. What might we hear if we were silent? If our world was silent? If instead of the noise of controversy and opinion and anger, there was silence, the vessel that holds all meaning? On this Shavuot, I wish us all the moment of silence in which somehow we may still be able to hear God's voice.